As Kate mentioned, I've been working with the Eagles out here this is my 11th season with the Bald Eagles, and tonight I'd just like to go over a little history of the Eagles in Southern California and the work that we've been doing since 1980 to help restore eagles to the California Channel Islands. Bald eagles once occurred on all 8 of the Channel Islands as well as along the mainland coast. However, by the early 1900s, they had disappeared from the mainland, primarily because people moved into the area. They were shot and hunted directly. Their habitat was destroyed as people moved in along the coast, but they did persist out on the islands until the mid-1900s. The reasons for the declines on the islands were many. One was they were shot. People would come out hunting the many goats that were on the islands, but if they had the opportunity to shoot an eagle, they would take that. Eagles had a pretty bad reputation, probably into the mid-1900s. People were scared to leave their kids out in the yards because bald eagles could come down and take off with your kid. And kids weren't the only thing. You know, they would attack full-grown adults and, put up pretty good fights. The thing that really did in the eagles, though, was the use of DDT. DDT was developed during World War II to control mosquitoes primarily in the South Pacific, heavily sprayed. After the war, it was brought back to the U.S. and used heavily on crops. It was sprayed in cities. It was pretty much sprayed everywhere, and large amounts of it. Now, advertisements from that period were, touting how great DDT was. You're singing animals. There's actually one line in this ad. It's a benefactor of all humanity. So at that time, they didn't quite realize how bad DDT actually was. DDT itself, dichloral diphenyl trichloroethane, that's why we call it DDT, is very poisonous. In the environment, it does break down into a variety of different byproducts, one of which is dichloral diphenyl dichloroethylene, DDE, which is actually what impacts the eagles and other sensitive species such as peregrine falcons, brown pelicans, cormorants, etc. So what this actually does, the change from DDT to DDE, is just the loss of one of the chlorine atoms in the environment. And what it does to birds is it causes the females to lay thin-shelled eggs. It interferes with how the calcium is laid down in an egg, and the adults crush the eggs before they can hatch. Before last year, the last known successful bald eagle nest on the Channel Islands was 1949 out on Anacapa Island. DDT was outlawed for use in the U.S. in 1972, and by the mid-1970s, brown pelicans, which had also been having almost complete reproductive failure, were again successfully hatching eggs. So during the late 1970s, it was decided to try to reintroduce bald eagles to the Channel Islands. And the group that I work for, the Institute for Wildlife Studies, was established to carry out those reintroductions. Catalina Island was chosen as the initial release point, and the goal was to get a very healthy population going there that would then expand out to the other islands and any suitable mainland areas as the population grew. Because there weren't bald eagles in Southern California anymore, we had to go to places where there were still relatively healthy populations. So we went to Northern California, Washington, and British Columbia, found nests that had at least 2 chicks in them, removed one of the chicks, and left one of the chicks for the adults to continue to raise. They were then brought down to Catalina Island and placed in what we call hacking towers. These are about 20 feet tall, have about an 8 by 8 foot cage on top, and then a viewing area behind through which we can feed the birds without being seen. And there's actually a one-way mirror there that we can watch the birds directly. So all we had to do was feed these birds for about a month and then open the doors on the cage. We released 33 eagles between 1980 and 1986. Many of these stayed on the island, survived, and formed breeding pairs. They form breeding pairs about 4 to 5 years of age, and that's when they get that white head and tail. The first eggs were laid in 1987, and unfortunately they broke in the nest pretty quickly. Same thing happened with all the eggs laid in 1988. We were able to get into the nests and retrieve some of the egg shells and some of the egg contents for chemical analyses. And here we'll be looking at DDE levels. And just for 3 to 5 parts per million, DDE is measured in parts per million. So just 3 to 5 molecules in a million molecules in an egg is where you start to see the eggshell thinning. If an egg contains 15 parts per million or more, you expect complete reproductive failure. So other areas that were considered polluted at that time with DDE, the Great Lakes and along the Columbia River, the Great Lakes had about 2.8 parts per million in their bald eagle eggs on average, 9.7 parts per million in those along the Columbia River. When we analyzed ours, they had 32.9 parts per million on average. So twice the level at which you would expect complete reproductive failure. So it's pretty obvious that there was a large amount of contamination somewhere. Now, this is looking at what that really means to an egg. This is a Catalina egg on the left and a healthy zoo egg on the right. You can see the overall lightness of the egg and then these areas of extreme thinning. DDE also affects the pores, so these eggs have larger pores, they lose water too quickly, and that also can kill the embryo. In the mid-1980s, it was discovered that Montrose Chemical Company in Torrance, California, who is the major producer of DDT at that time, had been discharging it as part of their production through the sewer systems, and it was coming out at the Whites Point outfall. And it's estimated that over 1,800 tons of DDT were dumped into the ocean through those outfalls, and another 500 tons or so were taken out in ships and barrels and dumped at a deeper water site. So a lot of DDT was added into the ocean. In a marine environment, DDT is not very water soluble, so it sinks down to the bottom, represented in red, and binds with the sediment. Then you have organisms in the sediment that pick up the DDT, and eventually it works into the food chain, up into the water column, becoming more and more concentrated at each step up the food chain until it hits the top predators. Now, bald eagles eat primarily fish. Our studies have shown about 86% of their diet are fish, and they would probably be fine if they were only eating fish. However, they also feed on a variety of marine birds, especially gulls, and dead marine mammals as well. When we did analyses of tissue samples from these other species, we found that fish around Catalina had very low contamination, averaging only 0.06 parts per million. However, when you look at gulls and sea lions, those have about 100 times more contamination than individual fish. So what we think was going on was because they're feeding additionally on marine mammals and gulls, that they were just getting too much contamination to be able to hatch their own eggs. So in 1989, when it was pretty clear that these birds were not going to be able to hatch their eggs anytime soon, we began a manipulation process in which each spring we look for active nests and wait for them to lay their eggs. And then as soon as they lay their eggs, we go in, we remove the fragile eggs, and then we put in fake eggs, which are the same basic size and weight of the real eggs. And the adults just continue to sit upon these eggs for the 35-day incubation period. The eggs were then transported up to the San Francisco Zoo, where they artificially incubated the eggs. We removed 81 eggs between 1989 and 2004, and only 14 of those were able to hatch up at the San Francisco Zoo. So that was a very poor hatching rate. We continued to analyze all the eggs that did not hatch and found that they were very contaminated, especially in two of our territories, the Pinnacle Rock and West End territories. You notice that the DDE levels bounce around, but they're consistently above that 15 parts per million where you expect complete failure. We have had lower values in our Twin Rocks and our Seal Rocks nests, and those are starting to get down towards that 3 to 5 parts per million where you might expect some hatching success. These represent different birds. If there's a break in a line, that's a switch in the females. For instance, this female actually died of DDT poisoning in 1993. So she was then replaced by another bird and then another bird. Fortunately, the San Francisco Zoo had 7 breeding pairs of bald eagles, and we were able to get any of the chicks that they produced to bring down to Catalina and either release from our towers or put into active nests. We would get the chicks when they were about a week old, 1 to 2 weeks in general, bring them down to Southern California, and go to the nests. Most of the nests on the island we are able to hike or ski to. This one is much more fun coming down than going back up. So all these nests on Catalina are on rock pinnacles, rock ledges. Currently we have no nests in trees because we really don't have that many large trees on the island. So they're all overlooking the water, and they're all pretty much, you step off the nest and you end up in the water.
Are they pretty upset when you're doing this?
The birds are pretty upset, and you'll see some dive bombs. The whole time they're flying around yelling at you, dive bombing. And I'll just shut up for a minute. You can hear them come by. These were about 5 to 6 days old. So we keep them, in captivity until they're at least 5 or 6 days old, and then by that time they've gone through any physical problems, hopefully, that they might have had, and they're healthy and ready to go. And with one last dive bomb. And we use the rocks as barriers between us and the bird if we can. So the birds generally return to the nest within 5 minutes of us leaving, and they accept the chicks right away, which you'll see in some video in a little bit. As I said, most of the nests we can walk to. Some of the nests are in places where we can't get there quickly. We want to be in and out of the nest within about 20 minutes, or else the birds have a tendency to abandon. This particular nest takes about 2 hours each way to get to. So in this case, we bring out a helicopter, put out a 100-foot rope, which attaches to me in a harness, and this has become known as the dope on a rope technique. During this one, we actually had the CBS 2 News helicopter out to film as well, so you get a very different view of this. This guy does construction lifting, so he places air conditioners on buildings, and so he's very good. He's the only person I fly with. And this particular nest, it's about a 5-minute trip each direction. We're still in Catalina.
Are you in communication with them?
I have a headset so we can communicate back and forth. Usually not much to say, though. Yeah, watch out for this. He tries to keep me about 40 feet above the ground until we drop off the cliff. And so I'm hooked up to a hook on the bottom, but there's also a safety strap that runs all the way through the helicopter. And this guy, Reggie, sits there with a knife taped to his hand to cut that strap if they have to put me down real quickly before they crash into the water or something. So they've got their eyes on me the whole time. This is the Pinnacle Rock nest on Catalina. So this is my view from my helmet cam going into the nest right there. And in this particular case, the male did not want to get up off of the nest. Had to yell at him a little. So it really only takes about 15 to 30 seconds to make the switch, take out the fake eggs, and put in the chicks. Pardon me? He gives me a little bit of slack, so I'm kneeling in the nest, but he gives me some slack so I can kneel down. But he's still, he's going up and down about that much in space, just sort of keeping me ready to lift off so I can't fall off the edge of the nest. And this is real time, probably about 55 seconds since the bird took off, and he's back again. So he goes from sitting on eggs to sitting on chicks within a minute and a half.
Where the mom comes from.
So from that point on, the adults are in charge of the chicks. It makes our life a lot easier than having to do the hacking towers and feeding them every day. We return to the nest when the chicks are 8 weeks old, like this one is. And at that point, they're essentially full grown, at least in body. Their feathers are about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way grown in. And at this time, we ban them because they're not able to fly yet and don't tend to try to jump out of the nest. So at that time, we put on a federal leg band, which is permanent identification, send that number to the bird banding lab, and if the bird is ever found anywhere, they can look up that number, find out where it came from, when it was banded, etc. We also put on what are called patagial wing markers, which are visual identification of the bird from a distance, and then a radio transmitter. My pointer is now dying. But there's a radio transmitter on the back, which allows us to go out with a receiver and an antenna and track down the birds to make sure that they're healthy once they start flying. We currently have 5 active territories on the island, going from age. Twin Rocks started in 1985, Seal Rocks in 88, Pinnacle Rock in 90. Up here at the west end, we've got actually a trio of birds, 2 females and a male, that have been breeding together since 92. The second female joined the original pair in 92, and they've been breeding together up through this year, although the male actually disappeared at the end of 2005, and a younger male took his place, but it's been a consistent trio the whole time. And I've only heard of maybe half a dozen other cases of a trio.
Is that in a separate nest or the same nest?
They're in the same nest. They share the same nest. Those orange wing markers come in very handy. These birds do tend to leave the island. About 50% of the ones that we release on the island leave and travel to the mainland. And we've had reports of them from down near Mexico all the way up into Canada, Vancouver Island. We currently have one that we're getting reports of up, I believe, in Vancouver, and it's been seen there multiple times recently. So this helps us keep track of the birds once they leave the island. About end of 2000, there was a lawsuit settlement against Montrose Chemical for their pollution, which freed up a lot of money for restoration work in the Southern California Bight. At that time, it was decided to try to restore eagles to Santa Cruz Island and the Northern Channel Islands, hoping that because it's farther away from the main pollution source off the Palos Verdes Peninsula, that the food would be less contaminated and the birds would have a better chance of hatching their eggs. There's other benefits of getting bald eagles up on the northern islands. During the 1990s, golden eagles moved onto the northern islands and started breeding for the first time in recorded history. The problem with that is that they were probably drawn out initially by the abundant feral pigs and piglets, which make a very good food source. But the 3 of the northern islands also have island fox, which had not evolved with a predator, and it's very difficult to even get them to look up. So they were easy pickings for the eagles. And this is a nest from last year, a golden eagle nest. We were trying to trap the adults at this nest, and we'd cleared all of the food out of the nest a week prior. When we went back a week later, they had half a dozen island fox in the nest. I believe 4 of them had radio transmitters on them. So they were picking off foxes left and right. I mean, these are just the ones that were in the nest. So we did the same sort of thing as we had done on Catalina, just supersized it. Here we built 2 hacking towers, each with 2 cages on it, so that we were able to release up to 16 birds simultaneously. The goal of the project was to release 12 birds a year for 5 years and then monitor them to see what happened. We had to find eagles to bring down, so we went to Juneau, Alaska, where the eagles are abundant, and did helicopter surveys looking again for nests with 2 or more chicks in them. We then traveled out by boat to the nest sites that we had found, hired Jim Spickler to climb the trees for us. He's an extraordinary tree climber and biologist. He would get up into the nests and remove one of the chicks. Now, the interesting thing about this nest is these 2 chicks can't be more than probably 4 or 5 days different in age, but the one on the right, if I was to age them just by sight, I would say it's probably 5 weeks old, and the other one 7 to 8 weeks old. So the one on the left has been getting all the food and keeping the one on the right from eating. So we took the one on the left and hopefully gave the other one a second lease on life. The bird is then lowered out of the tree by Jim, and we do a quick check of them to make sure that they appear healthy.
Get the donkey, set it back up.
We don't want that one. We never saw that one. Then they're taken back to the boat and put in large dog crates for their transport back to Southern California. They were taken to Juneau, put on Alaska Air Cargo, flown to LAX, driven to Ventura, and taken out on the boat. So we were putting 2 to 4 eaglets in each cage. Here they are. This is the South Tower, I believe, on the eastern portion of Santa Cruz. At 7 or 8 weeks, they're able to feed themselves, which is one of the reasons we get them at that age. So all we have to do is throw the fish in, and they're able to feed themselves. When they're about 11 and a half weeks old, we go in to ban them. We don't have to worry about them jumping out of a nest, so we can wait until they really are full grown. Go in at night with headlamps, so you blind them, grab them real quickly, and then put a hood on, and they essentially go to sleep during the banding process. You'll be sitting there and they're snoring. On the northern islands, we put on a blue wing marker compared to the orange one on Catalina. And we also, because we have some money on this project, we put on a GPS unit. This unit weighs about 70 grams and takes its location up to 14 times per day, stores it. Every 3 days it uploads to a satellite, and then we're able to download the data on the computer and get all their locations. So I'll show you some maps in a few minutes of those, but that's very helpful for following the birds around. when they're about 12 weeks old, again, we just open the doors on the tower, and they generally start coming out within half an hour or so. But it can take up to a week or more for all the birds to get the guts to take a flight. That's the best wing exercise it's had in the last month. And then a few minutes later, it took off. Because they don't have adults to feed them, we do put out food in and around the tower for about a month and then start moving it away so that they get the scavenging skills and learn to hunt for their food. They are primarily scavengers, though, for the first year. They don't really get the ability to catch fish and birds until they're about a year old. So, over the past 5 years, we've successfully released 61 eagles onto the island. During the first 3 years, most of these did come from Alaska. The last 2 years, the zoo has changed their incubation procedures a little bit, and their hatching success went way up. So almost all the birds in the last 2 years have been from the San Francisco Zoo. We have gotten 2 birds from a rehab center in Northern California, and 1 from Catalina that I had to remove from the West End nest last year because it had a broken leg when we went in to band it. So we don't know how that happened, but we fixed that and then released it up on Santa Cruz Island. So a lot of the birds have stayed on the island. On Catalina, as I said, about 50% leave. We've had a much higher retention rate up on the northern islands, and they've stayed. They've started maturing. They go through different molt patterns. This one's probably about 2 years old, and then about 4 years old, you start seeing that white head and tail. So we now do have adults on the northern islands for the first time in 50 years or so. So this is just some of the GPS data, just a representation of what we get. You can see they move amongst all 4 of the northern islands pretty readily, and we've noticed different patterns in their island use. They tend to use the western portion of Santa Rosa Island from, say, September through January. September through December, it's mostly interior, and we believe that they're following the elk and deer carcasses left over from the hunts. So there's plenty of food interior. If you put roads on your maps, they actually seem to follow the road. The points are along the roads and along the ridges. Then when the marine mammals come in the latter part of the year, they start using the beaches more and feeding on dead marine mammals and afterbirth and dead pups. Then last year especially, in February through July or August, they moved over to Anacapa Island and are most likely feeding on the abundant seabirds over there. But again, they can probably just scavenge there. When we went over there in October, there was dead birds all over the island. So there's probably plenty. They can probably just walk around the island and pick up dead birds out there. Unlike Catalina, that when the birds leave the island, we're dependent on people to see those tags. For the Northern Islands project, we're able to follow the birds wherever they might wander. So we've had a couple birds go up to Montana, a couple up to Canada, and it's very interesting and helpful to know these tracks. On Catalina, if a bird disappears, it just disappears. One of the benefits or the drawbacks of the GPS units is that we also know that a lot of the birds die in the ocean. Whether it's usually birds that are less than about a month post-fledging, so they've been flying for less than a month, and they just end up in the water, either flying back and forth between islands or apparently trying to go to the mainland. And then we just start getting these tracks that are circling around in the ocean, and we've had them floating out there for a couple weeks before either the transmitter dies or something eats the carcass. So this is not an uncommon cause of death in other populations. They find birds up in Alaska in the water quite often. Some of the interesting things that have happened was in late 2005, we started seeing Catalina birds up on Santa Cruz Island. Both of these birds had been put into nests on Catalina, the male in 2001 and the female in 2002. We'd had reports of them on the mainland, but at some point they moved over to Santa Cruz Island. And this isn't really that far-fetched. bald eagles generally return within about 200 miles of where they hatched and learned to fly to breed themselves. So the 200-mile ring around Catalina is in orange and around Santa Cruz is in blue. So all of the Channel Islands fall within that range. We actually have a Catalina bird breeding at Lake Hemet, which is out towards Palm Springs. So that's also within that 200-mile range. So last year in March, when Jessica and Dave were doing their boat survey, they saw these two birds sitting in the top of a tree that looked to have a nest. It was later confirmed that there was a nest. There weren't eggs at that time. A couple days later, Jessica called in and said, they're in incubation posture. And we later confirmed that they were sitting on 2 eggs. On April 12th of last year, they successfully hatched one of those eggs. The first one disappeared sometime a few days earlier than that. So this was the first known successful hatch on any of the Channel Islands since 1949, and it was a great event. We had this camera set up. We worked with Ventura County Office of Education and the Park Service to get this live feed on the internet. So a lot of people watched this chick develop and eventually fly. So again, we went into this nest when it was about 8 weeks old, banded it, number 49, and from that point on, it's done very well. The last 4 weeks in the nest, they spent a lot of time exercising, building up their flight muscles, jumping back and forth across the nest. And I think this one, it took about 13 weeks or so for it to take its first flight. So it was a week or so behind what is the average. But it is done very well. It's been on most of the northern islands. Recently, it took a trip up to Central California, didn't like it up there, and is back out on Santa Cruz Island now. When I was going out to hopefully witness that first hatching, I took a look at the GPS data from the birds and noticed that one of our females was spending about half of her day and all of her night at the same point. So I called up and said, "Have you guys checked out this nest?" And they said, "Well, we've been out there, but it's just a field. There's no nest there." I asked them to go check it again, and they did. Went out, and right there, sitting in the field, was a bald eagle. They just put a couple sticks in the field and laid eggs. So about a month after that first nest hatched, these guys actually hatched one of their eggs. We don't know how many eggs they had, but they hatched an egg. This isn't the greatest quality because it's taken with my digital camera through a spotting scope. The closest we could get to even watch this nest was about 350 meters away. And there's no place to stick a camera in the field. So that bird also fledged, and last I knew it was out on Santa Rosa Island. So while the Santa Cruz Northern Channel Islands project was getting going full bore, we were asked to try to incubate the eggs from Catalina on Catalina to help save money. So we developed an incubation facility in Avalon, rented an apartment, modified one of the bedrooms for an incubation facility. We have a couple different incubators that we use. And so for the last 3 years, we've been incubating the eggs there, which has saved a lot of wear and tear on the eggs for traveling up to San Francisco. So we bring the eggs in, we measure them, we can, using equations, calculate what they should have weighed when they were laid, and then we want to have about a 15% weight loss during their 35-day incubation. Because they do tend to lose water too quickly, we put on what's called tegaderm, sort of like a Scotch tape that minimizes water loss. We weigh the eggs and candle the eggs daily to watch their development. You can see a little bit in the center of this egg, developing embryo. 2 days later, you'll see much more development and see the veins spreading out. So we can watch the whole development of these eggs, and eventually you see the embryo at a week and a half, you see it swimming around in there, and you get a lot of movement back towards the end of that. Then, hopefully 35 days later, we get a hatch. Hatching is actually about a 3-day process. The first day, they just break internally, what's called internal pipping, into the air cell, which is the area that opened up as the water was lost. About 24 hours later, they'll externally pip and put a single hole in the shell. And then 24 to 36 hours after that, they'll just start spinning and opening up the end of the egg. That takes between 1 and 2 hours to just turn all the way around and then hatch. They're not the cutest of things when they first come out, but a few hours later, they've dried out and their down has fluffed up, and they become little fluff balls. They like to keep that egg position that they've been in for the last 35 days. They usually get their first meal about 6 to 20 hours later, whenever they start calling and have pooped, so we know that their digestive system is working. First meal is about 1/2 gram of quail, second meal 1 gram, third 1.5 grams, and they're fed about every 2 hours. By day 5 or 6, they're eating 20 grams per feeding. So they're actually doubling their size every 2 to 3 days. That's why they can be full grown by 8 weeks. So in our first year of incubation on the island, I managed to hatch 3 of 9 eggs, 3 of 9 fertile eggs that were removed, and that matched the best success that the zoo had had. Last year, I hatched 5 of 8, probably because I modified our incubator a little bit, and this year I hatched 7 of 9. So in the 3 years, I've hatched more eggs than were hatched at the zoo during that whole previous period, and very happy with that success. I don't know if I can top that. I might just have to retire now. This is them. This is this year's chicks, ranging in age from a few hours to about 5 days. And this is after feeding, so they're pretty happy now. Imagine 7 chicks yelling for food at the same time. So because we hatched so many, we actually had more chicks than we really had room in nest. We generally put 1 or 2 chicks in. This year we put 3 chicks into that west end nest that has 3 adults, figuring 3 adults can probably take care of 3 chicks, and they have been doing very well. So we fostered 7 chicks into 3 different nests this year, bringing our total to 107 that have been fostered or hacked onto the island over the last 27 years. Because of the success on the Northern Channel Islands last year, we decided to let at least 1 nest on Catalina keep their eggs this year and see if they could hatch. So we chose the Seal Rocks one in red there, which had consistently had about 6 to 7 parts per million in their egg, except for this, and I think that's a fluke. I don't think it's possible for them to jump that much in a single year. Then we also let Pinnacle Rock, which had consistently been high, keep their eggs, because the female died at the end of 2005 and a younger female moved in 2006. And I was actually able to hatch 1 of her eggs last year, which was the first egg ever to hatch from that territory. So because she was only 8 years old this year, we figured she might not have too much contamination in her yet. So we let her keep her eggs. And on March 31st and April 1st of this year, she did successfully hatch both of her eggs. And these were the first known successful hatchings on Catalina since, I think, 1945. So that was quite exciting. And a week later, the Seal Rocks nest also hatched her eggs. And we actually were able to capture the first hatching on tape. The female is a little bit confused. This is the first chick that she's ever seen hatch. All of her previous chicks have been about a week old. Yeah, so at a week old, they're yelling for food as soon as they see the adult. So she's hearing the chick. She's walking around carrying a fish and appears to want to feed it. But it looks like it still has its head stuck in the egg. So back up to the northern islands again, that pair that laid in the field last year, they decided to try it again this year. This photo was taken during a helicopter survey that we did of all 4 of the northern islands to see if we could find any other pairs. We did find other paired up birds, but no additional nests. Unfortunately, these guys broke their eggs about 2 to 3 weeks into incubation. And when it went out to collect the eggshell fragments, it looked like they had just basically been lying in the dirt. So it could have broken because of DDE, but it also could have just been ground into the dirt and broken that way instead of lying in them and laying them in nice soft grass. And then again, the Pelican Harbor nest, they again had 2 eggs this year. First one broke again, and on April 13th this year, they successfully hatched a chick as well. So 2 years in a row for these birds. So they haven't picked up too much contamination in the last year to hatch their eggs. I think this was taken on the 16th, so the male's looking over and the female is feeding about a 3-day-old chick.
Did you analyze the shell fragments from both the field and this nest?
No. The contamination is in the egg contents, not in the egg shell. We could probably measure the egg shell, but that wouldn't really tell us all that much. You need to have the yolk or the albumin to do some analyses, because DDE is actually stored in fat, so it's probably primarily in the yolk in an egg. So what's the current status of the birds on the Channel Islands? We're currently tracking 21 eagles with those that still have functioning GPS units. They've made their spring move over to Anacapa right now. The younger birds, we've got several birds on Santa Cruz and a couple over on Santa Rosa, and then one is up in Washington and one in southern Oregon.
Where are they on Anacapa?
Western Anacapa is where they hang out mostly, on the north side of western Anacapa. We've also been getting, as you saw, we've gotten birds come in from Catalina Island. We've gotten untagged birds come over to the island, which have probably come from maybe Central California populations. So we currently estimate that there are about 40 eagles on the 4 northern Channel Islands, where 6 years ago there were none. On Catalina, we have about 30 eagles. That does include the 11 chicks in the nests. We've been holding at about 20 free-flying birds for the last 5 or 6 years. We've got about 15 adults and then a variety of 1 to 3-year-old birds on the island. So we've got birds that are maturing and should be able to take over if any of the current breeding adults die off. And finally, 27 years later, we're starting to see the movement amongst all the islands. We've got the Santa Cruz, or the Catalina birds up on Santa Cruz. This particular male that we released in 2004 on Santa Cruz has visited San Nicolas and Santa Barbara, which is under the dots. And these are some of the first known visits of our released eagles to those islands. We've actually had 2 eagles visit San Nicolas, and I'm not sure what draws them out there, because that's about a 100-mile or 100-kilometer flight from these islands down there, and I don't know what draws them down there. So we've had birds on all 8 of the Channel Islands at one time or another. I know there's currently 1 or 2 Catalina birds on San Clemente Island, and we've got the good populations on Catalina and the other northern islands. We've also started to get movement the other direction down to Catalina. This is a 3-year-old female down the lower right that was released on Santa Cruz, who's apparently paired up with how old is he now? 8-year-old male on Catalina that's been hanging out we have a freshwater reservoir there for our water, and he's been there for probably 5 or 6 years, mostly courting our educational eagle that's housed nearby. So he's finally found somebody that he can actually access. So the projects have been very successful. I think reintroducing eagles on the northern island has started to make this whole thing sort of a single population the younger birds have drawn in other birds from the mainland and from Catalina. You can now see eagles on probably almost any of the 4 northern islands at various times of the year. We are getting more and more adults now. So if you start boating around the islands, you're going to see these birds along the coastlines forming territories. We're continuing to monitor the northern islands. We're doing no more releases, and the project calls for no interference at the nests. So all we're doing is monitoring and seeing if they can continue to hatch their own eggs. On Catalina, because of the success this year, I'm going to start going up the nests in order of their contamination and start letting birds keep their eggs. Any new pairs I'll let keep their eggs until they prove that they can't hatch them. And we'll monitor them very closely. Unlike on the northern islands, I'll put a fake egg in the nest if they start breaking their eggs, which will allow me to continue to foster chicks into the nests. If you want to find more information about these projects or get links to live eagle cams, we have 2 live eagle cams from Catalina and 1 from Santa Cruz. So you can go online and actually watch these chicks develop and eventually fly. We're going to be banding the birds in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So you'll see us visiting those nests as well. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Have you been able to test for contamination in the chicks? And if you have found any, is there any impact to them?
We do draw blood from the chicks when we band them, so at 8 weeks, and they do have contamination on the northern islands, and it's in line with what is seen with the chicks on Catalina as well. So it's just not known whether that's too much contamination, whether they are eventually not going to be able to breed, or if they're only picking it up at a level where they can break it down in their body and not accumulate too much contamination. Yes?
Do you see any birth defects in the chicks?
No, we've never seen any birth defects and related to the DDE. I don't think we've seen any birth defects at all, actually. Yes?
What's the current status of the Goldens?
Goldens, we believe there's 1 maybe on Santa Cruz Island. I think there's been some fox mortalities recently, but until it actually settles down somewhere, it's really difficult to identify and or trap them. So you usually have to find a breeding pair to trap them. Yes?
Between mating seasons, do the couple, the male and the female, tend to stay around the same area, or do they fly off to different areas and then come back again?
They'll spend most of the time within their territory, which is generally maybe 2 to 4 kilometers of coastline. They will wander a little bit further, especially up on the northern islands where there aren't territories scattered all around. They don't have to worry about going into someone else's territory for the most part. So the ones on Santa Cruz do seem to wander a little bit more during the winter. Yes?
How are the nests that were up in high, hard to reach places found?
A lot of watching. We just go out, survey the coastline, and look for adults. Excuse me. And then you just sit there and watch which direction they tend to fly more. You move over there, they might be going up this canyon. You move over that way, and you just keep watching them, see if they're carrying sticks, and you just get lucky most of the time. Fortunately, they reuse their nests year after year. So once you found it, you have a pretty good chance of knowing where they're going to breed the next year. Yes?
Of the populations on the northern islands, what's the ratio of male to female?
It's a little bit skewed towards females. I think there were last time we actually calculated maybe 18 females and 11, 12 males. So it's not that bad. At one point it was pretty skewed because we were tending to take the largest birds out of the nests in Alaska, which turned out to be females. Yes?
What is their lifespan?
Eagles can live 35 to 40 years in the wild, but I would say a typical lifespan is probably more maybe 15 if they survive their first couple years. The first couple years are definitely the most dangerous, probably 30 to 40% mortality each year. But once they're adults and settle down in a territory, survival is probably about 90 to 95% per year. So once they reach breeding age, they survive quite long. Yes?
You had mentioned seeing several dead seabirds on Anacapa Island the eagles could eat.
Right.
Do you think that might be related to the algal toxin problem that we have?
I don't know. We were out on the island in October, so it's hard to say when those birds died. And with that many seabirds, you're going to be getting mortality, quite a bit of mortality just from random occurrences. And then chicks that don't survive, the chick deaths could be related to, who knows, low fish abundance or, inability to feed them. It's hard to say.
Do you monitor for algal toxins in your birds?
No, we don't. Yes? Historically, there were, I think, 26, estimated to be 26 pairs, which is, I would say, low. But that's for all 8 of the islands. And I would definitely say that's low. I think there were half a dozen known for Santa Cruz. And eagle nests are very difficult to locate, especially if they're on a rock face. People, you have to know where they are to see them for the most part. So if you're in a boat going along, you can have eagles sitting right there and not even see them. So I think the estimates are probably low.
Effects of DDT on gulls?
Doesn't seem to be much effect. Different bird species react differently. Chickens actually get a thicker eggshell if you feed them DDT. So it's different by species. You just have some that are extremely sensitive for some reason and some that aren't.
What's the ideal population you'd like to see?
I don't want to set that because then I'd be out of a job. We really don't have a target. All we want to do is to get a breeding population restored. I think Santa Cruz could probably handle at least half a dozen nests and territories. Santa Rosa, probably about the same amount. A couple on Anacapa, a few on San Miguel. And I think historically there was one known on Santa Barbara Island. So, we could have easily 30 to 40 breeding pairs on all 8 of the islands. But we really don't have a target. We just want them to be able to breed on their own. Yes?
You mentioned female birds dying of DDT poisoning.
Mm-hmm.
How often have you seen adult birds die?
That's the only case, and it was probably secondary to something else. Because DDT is stored in the fat, she probably got sick or injured and couldn't feed herself, started using up her fat reserves, and that just released too much into her brain. I think she had 220 parts per million in her brain when she was analyzed, so it just knocked her out. Yes?
How long do the wing tags, are they legible, or how long?
I've got one on Catalina that's 15 years old, so they remain legible for quite a while. Occasionally they do get torn. The Seal Rock's male is about to lose one of his because it's halfway torn through, so it'll fall off at least one side of the wing pretty soon, but they last for quite a while. There's somebody else. Yes?
What kind of birds do the eagles attack?
It's mostly gulls. Mostly western gulls are what we've seen brought into nests, but they'll take just about anything they can catch.
Will they kill an adult western gull?
Yes. When I've seen them actually hunting them, it's been tag team. So one adult will come down, grab the bird, drag it along, drop it. The gull will end up in the water again. Second adult will come in and do the same thing, and then they just wear it down. Yes?
I've noticed that the ravens have been giving the nest a bit of a trouble out on K10 and K26.
Uh-huh.
Does the raven really, is it that much of an enemy to will it eat the chicklets?
It could probably take a chick up to a few days old, but then the chicks are getting too big.
It shouldn't really be bothering it anymore.
They just like to bother them. Anytime you see a flying eagle, you usually see ravens chasing it, especially on Catalina and on Santa Cruz. So I think they're more of a threat to the eggs. That's what I'm concerned about, because they can easily come in and stick a hole in an egg. But the adults are on the chicks pretty closely, and after a week or so, they're almost the size of a raven by that time. So I guess they could peck a chick to death, but they probably wouldn't get that much time.
What's the ratio between the eagle and the fox that they would kill?
How many foxes would they kill?
No, like the ratio between like the size.
Oh, golden eagles are probably about 8-9 pounds, and foxes are about half that. They're about the size of a house cat. So golden eagles are designed for hunting land mammals, rabbits and foxes. Usually they wouldn't be taking foxes, but these foxes just don't have predators or never have had predators before. But thank you for your time.